If you've experienced that, and my guess is that if you're breathing and you still have a pulse, you probably have, then you know a little bit of what it was that Jacob was going through in the middle of the night, in the midst of that wrestling match. And in it, he's told by the one that's wrestling with him, well, it's time to let me go, but he won't. And whoever this person is, and of course it's all of the above, touches him, that's a nice euphemism, isn't it? Wounds him in his thigh. And he experiences something deep inside in that moment. The wound that he experiences isn't just his wound. It's the wound of humanity in that place. Again, a wound is an archetypal image. It gets him in touch with his own self, what's going on deep inside himself. It's interesting that there's a question about what his name is in the middle of the night in this wrestling match. And that wound is wrapped up with revealing that. You know, it's not we sit around with our morning cup of coffee as we're looking through the paper and ask ourselves, I wonder who I am. No, that question comes up in the wee hours of the night when we're wrestling with our deepest issues. It comes out of nowhere. Who am I? Who am I really? And it can wound us deeply because it brings us to the core of who we are. It opens us up. It's an initiatory moment for us. In that wrestling match in the middle of the night, Jacob had the opportunity to meet himself and all that it signified for him. In the middle of that wrestling match, he met himself, but there was one there to bless him and not leave him simply in the midst of a midlife crisis, which would have been wrapping him up in his own little ego, his own self-concern. But it opened him up to new possibilities. And so it is that before the light dawns, he is given a new name, one who wrestles with God and man and prevails. Now that's a gift for us when in the midst of wrestling with ourselves, we're reconnected to who we are at the deepest level and to the rest of the world. In the midst of a midlife crisis, you know, there's the stereotype, the fellow, it's always a guy. We get saddled with that somehow. The fellow who buys the red sports car and runs off with the blonde secretary who's 25 years younger than him, right? But the ones who do that haven't really gotten the blessing that's intended in the midst of the wounding. It's the ones who recognize in the midst of their wounding their connection with humanity. And a new day dawns when that happens. A new resolve is reached. It's important to understand that when life wounds us, we don't just simply focus on the pain of our own wound, but we get curious about it. And we begin to wonder how it connects us with the rest of humanity. And when we do that, then whatever it is that has brought the wound can be the very thing that begins to work towards healing in our lives and gets us connected beyond ourselves. And isn't this what God is doing in Christ when God enters the woundedness of our own humanity? He enters into it and experiences us with it. So what? So that he can bring us into a more transcendent place where in God we are reconnected to our true selves, where we are reconnected to each other, where God reconnects us to himself. That's what's going on in this wonderful archetypal story, I believe. It leaves him wounded, but it sets him on a new course, doesn't it? So it is that he crosses that little rivulet that's left and goes to meet his brother and offers him everything he has. And his brother says, I don't need it. I have plenty. Look, I've got 400 men and lots of supplies. But it's interesting in the story, the follow-up story, that Jacob says, but I have all that I need too. Please take it. He's recognized another source of supply in his life. So it is that we do too. One of my heroes in the faith is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer had come to this country when Hitler was beginning to come to power in Germany. Friends had advised him that he needed to get out of Germany, and so he came to the United States, and he was going to be involved in continued graduate work. But somehow he could not let Germany go. And he said, you know, if I'm going to have the privilege of participating in the reconstruction of my homeland when this whole mess is over with, I have to go participate in the suffering of it. He wrestled with that concept, and friends, close friends, helped him wrestle with it. And he chose to go back to Germany and ultimately gave his life for the sake of his own people, being martyred by the SS a week after Easter and shortly before the end of the war. Bonhoeffer spoke of the wrestling match that he had been through in the poem entitled, Who Am I? And I share it with you as a word of grace this morning. Hear it for all of the promise that's in it. Even in the midst of his experience of woundedness, hear the promise that is in it. Bonhoeffer writes these words, Who am I? They often tell me I would step from my cell's confinement calmly, cheerfully, firmly, like a squire from his country house. Who am I? They often tell me I would talk to my warders freely and friendly and clearly, as though it were mine to command. Who am I? They also tell me I would bear the days of misfortune equably, smilingly, proudly, like one accustomed to win. Am I then really all that other men tell of? Or am I only what I know of myself, restless and longing and sick, like a bird in a cage, struggling for breath as though hands were compressing my throat, yearning for colors, for flowers, for voices of birds, thirsting for words of kindness, for neighborliness, trembling at expectation of great events, powerlessly trembling for friends at an infinite distance, weary and empty at praying, at thinking, at making, faint and ready to say farewell to it all. Who am I? This or the other? Am I one person today and tomorrow another? Am I both at once, a hypocrite before others and before myself, a contemptibly woe-begone weakling? Or is something within me still, like a beaten army, fleeing in disorder from victory already achieved? Who am I? They mock me, these lonely questions of mine. Whoever I am, thou knowest, O God, I am thine. Who am I in the middle of the night when I wrestle with my question? Oh God, I am yours, the God of life, the God who brings the sun, and there will be a tomorrow to go limping off into a whole new day. In the name of our redeeming Lord.